The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, he'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
The South Kesteven series is sponsored by Gainsborough Cycles 01427 617 752. For all your cycling needs, this is your one-stop shop located at 20 Ropery Road, Gainsborough, or online at gainsboroughcycles.com. There's a link in the description. Gainsborough Cycles, ask for Trevor Halstead. Hello folks, welcome back to South Kesteven once again for another week's worth of villages. And you find me this morning on the fens. You can see behind me a vast expanse of farmland. That's exactly what the fens are. There's one big problem with the fens being open and flat like this. When it's windy, it can be really cold. I'm kind of wishing I'd not had my hair cut last week, but never mind. Anyway, I'm not going to be here for very long, so I can get in the car and warm up again. This place is just one long street, and it begins here at its northern end and runs for about a half a mile down to the southern end, where there's a church, there's a care home, there's a moated site, and there's a hall. This is Dowsby. Dowsby, Ducey's farmstead. This week we have another set of South Kesteven villages to cover, and all of these are just to the north of Bourne, a town we're getting ever closer to. This one's called Dowsby, and it has a simple old Scandinavian meaning. This was Ducey's farmstead. Dowsby was founded during the period of Scandinavian settlement in eastern England, most likely in the 9th or 10th centuries. It's positioned on the western edge of the fens and was originally a small agricultural holding that became a village eventually. Evidence of much earlier activity survives at Hoe Hills, a group of Bronze Age round barrows which are marked on the map to the north. Archaeological finds from those include Roman and medieval material. We can deduce from that maybe that this land was used repeatedly over many centuries. In the Domesday Book, Dowsby appears as Duseby. It was recorded as a small settlement with land for agriculture and some meadow. The Domesday text for Dowsby is brief, but it does at least confirm that the village was established, taxed and functioning. There are three names which are linked to this place. The Burrell family became principal proprietors in the 1600s, and they have several memorials surviving inside St Andrew's Church. Later, the Hyde and the Foster families came along. The fen edge location meant that the drainage and land improvements have always been major concerns out here. In this video, we'll mention the Black Sluice drainage system a couple of times, within which Dowsby used to sit. Speaking of water-related things, there was once a 19th century duck decoy on Dowsby Fen. It used controlled water channels to trap birds for sale, and then they were probably transported by rail from Rippingale, as that was the nearest station historically. We won't be going out into the fen here because there's not really a lot of point. We know what the Lincolnshire fens look like by now, and it's probably going to be bumpy out there too. Instead, we'll stay within the main village. Its main landmark is St Andrew's Church, a Grade II listed building which has 12th century origins, with Norman fragments still visible. Much of the church was rebuilt in 1864, including the chancel and the aisles. The tower is perpendicular and the north arcade is Early English. Inside there's a recumbent effigy of Etheldreda Rigdon and several 18th and 19th century monuments to the Foster and Hyde families. There's also parts of a Saxon cross built into the outer wall of the south aisle. Behind the church too, there's a fantastic moated site. Let's go see it. Let's get this video started with a drive through Little Dowsby. This sits just north of Dowsby. It's a small hamlet that once held a loose scatter of farms linked to the village by lanes across the old fen. Driving through it today, it feels sparse with fields on all sides, but early maps make it clear there was once a firmer cluster here. Dowsby Mill once stood to the west of this road. It was a brick tower mill, long demolished but still marked on historic mapping. To the northeast lie Hoe Hills, a group of Bronze Age barrows where Roman and medieval finds have been recorded, though nothing is visible now from the road. Little Dowsby was never large, yet its past lingers in the straight drainage lines and the remembered site of Dowsby Mill. Right, so we've made it into the main Dowsby village, and as I said at the top of this video, this is basically just one long street and everything of note is on it, with the exception of Dowsby Hall, which is off to the right up a track. I don't know how close I'm going to be able to get to that, we'll soon see in a moment. Our first job is to make our way to the village hall, and between here and there it's basically all housing. This village hall stands on the main road, and it served Dowsby for over 100 years. Its origins lie in the early 1900s, when parish records noted the need for a meeting place separate from the old school and the church. Early directories mention a parish room used for gatherings, lectures and small events, and that early space formed the basis of the hall that followed. By the 1920s, it was firmly established as an important building in the village. During the Second World War, it hosted Home Guard meetings, ration-related sessions, and sewing groups producing items for relief work. After 1945, it became a venue for agricultural talks, reflecting Dowsby's place within the Black Sluice drainage district. Notices in the Lincolnshire Free Press during the 1950s record events held by farming groups and local clubs. Repairs in the 1960s and 1970s added heaters, roof work, and fresh paint. Later upgrades in the 2000s kept it practical without altering its modest scale. The playground behind the village hall is small but useful for local children. The land was chosen early on because it was already used for outdoor events and had room for simple equipment. By the early 1960s, it had gained its first fixed pieces. They were a metal slide, swings, and a wooden bench funded through local efforts. Basic, sturdy, and well used. In the 1970s, the Black Sluice Drainage District levelled the ground after heavy rain caused pooling, making the area far more reliable throughout the year. By the early 2000s, the site had modern surfacing, a small slide, toddler swings, and a spring rocker replacing older metal items. Today it remains compact, but it's still a valued feature behind the village hall. Okay, so there's a parish notice board on this village hall wall, but there's nowhere to actually put the card, so it kind of like an alternative place. There's this board here which is on about the defib machine, which is also on the wall. I'm just going to slot the card behind there for this one, because I know it'll stay there. Right, okay, let's move on. So from here, we're heading towards Dowsby Hall. Now, like I said earlier, this is our upper track to the right, so I don't know how close I'm going to get to this. We'll soon find out. Dowsby Hall has long been one of the village's key houses. Early Ordnance Survey maps record a substantial residence with outbuildings, gardens and a tree-lined approach. Its origins lie in the post-medieval period, when the Burrell family rose to prominence from the early 1600s onward, with strong documentary links tying them to the hall and its land. In the 1800s it remained the leading residence, by then the seat of the Hyde family, who succeeded the Burrells as principal landowners. Humphrey Hyde and his wife Mary, both commemorated in the church, are the best known figures from that era. By the early 1930s, the Fosters occupied the hall and also held the rectory for several decades. Later changes saw parts of their estate sold and some outbuildings adapted for modern farming. The house itself survives intact. It's now a private residence rather than the base of a major land-owning family. St Andrew's Church is the oldest surviving building in Dowsby. Its origins lie in the late 1100s, when the first stone church was raised on this site. Early fragments built into the walls, including parts of a cross shaft, hint at an earlier place of worship. The earliest work still visible includes Norman masonry in the nave and traces of round arched openings. By the 1200s, the church had gained its early English north arcade, with tall pointed arches that remain a defining feature. The tower came later, built in the perpendicular style with strong vertical lines and battlements. During the medieval period, the church was closely tied to the manorial families already mentioned, especially the Burrells, who have several memorials inside. The chancel, rebuilt at various times, also contains monuments to the Hydes and Fosters, along with a recumbent effigy of Etheldred of Rigdon from the early 1600s. A major restoration in 1864 rebuilt the chancel, renewed the roof, repaired the aisles, and added new seating. Inside there's a 19th century font, carved pews, wall tablets, and the important Burrell brasses. Outside, 6 listed table tombs from the late 1700s to early 1800s complete the site. The moated site near St Andrew's Church is one of the oldest features in Dowsby, and for good reason it's a highlight. It sits just southeast of the churchyard as a square or slightly rectangular platform, about 40 to 50 metres across, enclosed by a ditch that once held water. Its form and position point to a high-status medieval site, likely linked to an early manorial centre before Dowsby Hall took over that role. No building survives, but the earthworks remain clear. Notes in the Lincolnshire Historic Environment Record describe it as a homestead moat used for domestic buildings rather than defence. The Burrells may have had predecessors here, though the moat itself is older. Finds from the area include medieval pottery supporting long occupation. Its placement beside St Andrews fits a known Lincolnshire pattern in which early manorial sites sit close to parish churches, forming a paired focus of authority. From here, occupants could oversee farmland stretching towards the fen and the higher ground around Graby. The raised platform kept structures dry on the fen edge. By the 1800s, the moat had lost its purpose, the platform instead used as pasture, and parts of the ditch were allowed to silt up. This is the old school in Dowsby, a Victorian building first noted in 1872 as a school with a small £5 endowment from earlier benefactors. The 1888 Ordnance Survey map records a compact structure with one main room and a small porch. By 1896 it was listed as a public elementary school with space for about 40 pupils. Local photographs show the original brickwork and a small playground to the south. Heating came from a single stove, and former pupils recall cold winters and the smell of paraffin heaters. By the 1940s and 1950s, attendance had dropped, leading to closure and the transfer of pupils to larger schools in Billingborough or Rippingale. The building was then used as a store before becoming a private residence. Despite alterations, its tall schoolroom windows still mark it out as the last trace of Dowsby's earlier educational life. Yew Tree Care Home now, which occupies the former rectory. It was first listed in White's Directory of 1872 as the residence of the Reverend Kingsman Foster, rector for nearly 3 decades. The house is a substantial Victorian brick building with a long drive, gardens and outbuildings. It stayed in clerical use until the early 1900s, and by 1930 it was home to the Reverend Arthur Foster, continuing the family's longer link with the parish. Mid-20th century changes in church organisation led to the sale of rural rectories, and Dowsby's followed that pattern. The building passed into private hands but kept its original form and its position overlooking the church. It later became Yew Tree Care Home, using the large rooms and generous layout of the old rectory for residential care. The grounds, once rectory gardens and small orchards, now serve as outdoor space. Early maps mark it as the rectory, later ones label it as Yew Tree House, a name likely drawn from the long-established yew trees by the churchyard. Okay, that's pretty much the walk through Dowsby. There's not much more to it than that. And now the sun is starting to come up properly above the horizon. It's starting to feel a bit warmer now, which is a good thing. Dowsby should be seen as a village filled with sites which are all linked together. There's a really tight cluster of historic features around St Andrew's Church in particular, the oldest structure here and the anchor for much of Dowsby's development. But there's also a series of important names which glue this one together. The Burrells, the Hydes and the Fosters are all linked directly to the farms that shaped local life. And then of course there's Dowsby Hall. For me, the best bit about Dowsby is that moated site with its square platform and its ditch marking the earliest high status focus, likely the first manorial centre before the later houses took over. And the casual passerby would never notice it really. It proves the past is sometimes so easy to miss.
The path beside the old church wall, brass plates said our names in the fading hall. Fields we held stretched far past the moated ground. Our mark still sits in every stone we found. Old walls breathe on through frost and rain, keeping our footsteps in their frame. Voices carried strong and clear, Dowsby, we stand where the past is near, holding the vows we chose to keep. Dowsby, the ground where our lives ran deep. Hey! Oh, hey! The keys of the rectory door, letters inked with tasks we could not ignore, names carved high on the chancel stone, duty held firm in a place we called our own. Old walls breathe on through frost and rain, keeping our footsteps in their frame. Voices carried strong and clear, Dowsby, we stand where the past is near, holding the vows we chose to keep. Dowsby, the ground where our lives ran deep. Hey! Oh, hey! The hall with a steady stride, fields and gardens set out side by side. Our names still rest in the church's light, stone on stone holding our place in sight. Old walls breathe on through frost and rain, keeping our footsteps in their frame. Voices carried strong and clear, Dowsby, we stand where the past is near, holding the vows we chose to keep. Dowsby, the ground where our lives ran deep. Hey! Oh, hey! the ground you see. Burrow, foster, hide in harmony. Our names still move through the air, held in the stones that keep us there. Dowsby, the place where our paths stay true, past and present carried through.
Hello folks, welcome back to South Kesteven for another episode this week. Now then, this is a place that often catches a lot of non-locals out. You look at this place on the map and you see it spelt A-S-L-A-C-K-B-Y, which you might think is Aslackby. It's not Aslackby. We speak a funny old language out here in Lincolnshire. This is Aslackby and Laughton. Aslackby and Laughton, Aslacker's farm and vegetable farm. Today on TVI we come to the parish of Aslackby and Laughton, and yes folks, that is how you pronounce it. Aslackby is one of those villages that often catches non-Lincolnshire folk out. They often think it's Aslackby, but it's a funny old lingo we speak out here. The name Aslackby is Old Norse in origin. It likely comes from Aslacker, which was a personal name. Laughton derives from the Old English Leekton, meaning vegetable enclosure or garden farm, and it's far easier to understand than that of the main village. Whatever you want to call it, human activity in the area long predates written records. The parish lies on the edge of the Lincolnshire Fens, where prehistoric settlement was common because of dry islands in higher ground. Although no major prehistoric site has been excavated within the parish itself here, its position between Bourne and Sleaford places it within a landscape known for Roman roads, small farmsteads and drainage channels. Aslackby and Laughton developed as small agricultural settlements, and both appear in the Domesday Book. Their entries confirm that both settlements were functioning agricultural units with established fields and tenants shortly after the Norman conquest. However, Aslackby would go on to be far more important religiously. It became linked with the Knights Templar who held a preceptory here. It was one of several Templar estates in Lincolnshire. The buildings later fell out of use and became a farm. Laughton developed differently. West Laughton became a small medieval settlement that later declined. By the 16th century it had fewer than 20 families, and by the 19th century it was largely deserted. Only earthworks of the deserted medieval village now survive. The modern parish of Aslackby and Laughton was created in 1931, combining the two former parishes of Aslackby and Laughton by Sempringham. Both had previously been part of the old Bourne rural district. The most significant landmark now between them is St James's Church in Aslackby. That's a Grade 1 listed building. Its chancel is Early English in style and was largely rebuilt in 1856. It stands near the site of the former preceptory, and some of its stone fragments are believed to have come from that. There's also a pub here and another that's closed. There's a pretty little ford too, and an old chapel which is linked to it. Behind the church there's also the remains of a moated site, which some often think was a castle. Here's a little spoiler though, it's not. Let's go. The parish of Aslackby and Laughton also includes a tiny hamlet called Graby. This is made up of a few houses and a few farm buildings, yet its past can be traced through medieval landholding. Its name comes from Old Norse or Old Danish, probably meaning grey farmstead or farm of a man named Gra. Early references sometimes used the longer form Graby by Aslackby, though that has long fallen out of use. Graby is absent from the Domesday Book because its land was included within Aslackby's holdings, and by the later medieval period it was fully tied to the Aslackby Manor, as it remains today. Okay, so we've driven up from Graby and we're now in Aslackby. Now, the first job here is to make our way to the church, which is a long way from where I actually am here. I'm at the far western end of the village. It's all housing between here and the church for a good quarter of a mile, if not a bit further. So enjoy this, won't you? In the main village now, this is St James's Church. It stands at the centre of Aslackby with a structure shaped across different periods. Although no church is listed in the Domesday Book, one was certainly in place here by the early 13th century, supported by the nearby Templar Preceptory. The earliest firm reference to a priest appears in 1225, naming Geoffrey de Temple, linked to the Knights Templar. Their base was close by, but not on this site. The present building contains work from the 13th, 14th and 15th centuries. The north wall of the chancel, with tall Early English lancet windows, is the oldest surviving element. The tower, added in the later medieval period, includes unusual blocked arches, hinting at a larger plan. The tower arch is admired for its scale and detail, and historic graffiti survives in the porch and the tower, including the name of highwayman Spence Broughton, hanged in York and later gibbeted in Sheffield. The link with the Templars lasted until 1312, when the order was suppressed. Their estates, including the Aslackby Preceptory, passed to the Knights Hospitaller, who appointed priests such as Nicholas de Camelton in 1321. After the dissolution of the monasteries, the church and its lands were granted in 1541 and 1542 to Edward, Lord Clinton, and his wife Ursula. Parish registers begin in 1558. Major restoration here in 1857 rebuilt the chancel and removed the royal arms from the chancel arch. Further work in the 1890s repaired the nave and the aisle roofs, removed pews, and added parquet flooring. Between 2008 and 2010, the West End was reordered with a meeting room and a kitchenette. A 2022 project repaired leaking roofs, treated water-damaged timbers, and digitised historic records. St James's even won awards in 2009 and 2024 and remains open daily as part of the Billingborough group of parishes. Behind the church lies a set of earthworks often labelled on modern maps as Aslackby Castle. Now, despite the name, this is not a castle. Instead, it's the remains of a medieval moated enclosure. The castle idea arose from repeated errors in 19th century county histories. Thomas Allen's 1834 history claimed the Wakes built a castle here, describing great ditches and a dungeon hill, but later research proved he had mistakenly applied John Leyland's account of Bourne Castle to Aslackby. William White then repeated the error in 1872, helping it persist. By the late 20th century, castle specialists such as D.J. Cathcart King had dismissed the claim entirely, confirming the medieval description belonged to Bourne. Even so, these earthworks remain significant. Archaeological work identifies a rectangular inner moat about 50 metres by 55 metres, visible as a crop mark, along with a larger outer enclosure roughly 160 metres across with ditch lines on three sides. No stone foundations, defensive banks or structural remains of a castle have ever been found here. The most convincing interpretation is that this was part of a manorial complex, and the resemblance to the moated site at Dowsby strengthens that view. And that is still marked on modern maps as Aslackby Castle, but it's not a castle, apparently. Now, we've got another long walk to undertake now. From the church, we continue to the east. We're heading for the A15, and we're heading towards the village hall. And then when we've been to the village hall, we'll turn around at that point and then go to the two pubs that Aslackby has. There's only one that's actually open now, though. The village hall on Sleaford Road is a modest early 20th century building. Before it was built, gatherings in Aslackby took place in schoolrooms, farm buildings or private houses. By the 1920s, a permanent venue was needed and a simple hall was put up on this site. It has been improved over time, maintained by volunteers and supported through small events, raffles and hire fees. Electric lighting and better heating arrived in the 1960s, replacing paraffin heaters. Further work in the 1970s and 1980s repaired the roof, refreshed the interior and added a basic kitchen. Village trail leaflets of that era all begin here. The hall remains in regular use today, valued for practicality and its long-held central position. Aslackby has two pubs to cover, and this is the one that's still trading. It's called the Robin Hood and Little John, and it stands on the main road running north to south through the village. Its name appears in 19th and early 20th century trade directories, which list it as Aslackby's principal alehouse. The title may seem unexpected in Lincolnshire, but during the 1800s, numerous inns adopted names drawn from English folklore, and this one followed that pattern. Its exact foundation date is unclear. In its early years, it operated as a straightforward rural alehouse with a small bar, limited food and a focus on draft beer. By the 1980s, it had gained a reputation for hearty meals and a simple drinks list. A major change came when it closed for 2 years in the early 2010s. After some refurbishment, it reopened in January 2016 with a stronger food focus and a new restaurant area added to the original bar. The second Aslackby pub is the former Red Lion, now a private house. It once stood on the old route of the A15 before the road was moved. Like the Robin Hood and Little John, its earliest firm reference appears in 19th century trade directories. Positioned on a busy agricultural route, it served carriers, drovers and travellers on foot or horseback, offering ale, simple meals and shelter. It followed the pattern of small rural alehouses, a modest bar, limited seating and a focus on draft beer rather than food. That lack of diversification likely contributed to its decline. The Red Lion closed in the 1960s, leaving the Robin Hood and Little John as Aslackby's sole surviving pub. Now, Temple Farm is no ordinary farmstead. Its name points directly to Aslackby's greatest historical site, the Knights Templar Preceptory. Founded in or just before 1164, it received the Church of Aslackby and its chapel from Hubert de Rye in the same year Thomas Becket left King Henry II at Northampton, giving a firm date for its establishment. By the late 12th century, the preceptory had become a working Templar estate, managing farmland, collecting rents and supporting the order's activities. Its layout followed the pattern seen at other Lincolnshire Templar sites, such as Temple Brewer. The buildings are known only through early descriptions and surviving drawings. The church had a round nave inspired by the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. It had a chancel with an apsidal east end and a tower added in around 1200 on the south side. Samuel Hieronymus Grimm and Peter de Wint recorded these remains before they vanished. Their sketches are preserved in the Aveland Archive and they confirm the tower and a vaulted undercroft. The Templars were suppressed in the early 1300s and their estates, including Aslackby, passed to the Knights Hospitaller. The preceptory buildings continued in agricultural use, though their religious role ended. By 1891, the last standing tower and undercroft had been absorbed into Temple Farmhouse. The farm now occupies the footprint of the preceptory, and although no major structures remain above ground, the site still attracts interest for its link to the Templars and its unusually well-documented past. Not really a lot to see there now, to be honest with you. There's just a boarded up house, which I'm sure you noticed. That's probably got a few ghostly tales to tell, I would have thought. It looks really creepy, I must admit. So now we're on a little green that's between the site of the preceptory and the church. I'll just show you where I am. There's the front of the church there. To the left you can see there's a road. That is Kirkby Underwood Road, and that's where we're going next. Here on Sovereign Street is a small ford crossing the stream that feeds the Fen Edge drainage network on which Aslackby sits. This is a natural crossing point where the water is shallow and the banks are firm, which explains why the road still dips into the channel below. Before modern bridges, fords like this were the simplest way to cross streams. It looks peaceful in good weather, but in winter or after heavy rain it can flood. Fen Edge streams rise quickly, though the ford is usually passable for light vehicles and walkers all year round. There was a small chapel that once stood close to this spot. Nothing survives today. By the 1990s it had disappeared, leaving only written references. There is another chapel in this village though, and that still awaits us. old school on Sovereign Street served Aslackby for more than 100 years and now survives as a converted house. Built in 1850 and funded by the Lord of the Manor, it was designed as a 1.5-storey red brick building with a steep roof, decorative barge boards and finials, features that are still visible today. It taught children from Aslackby and Laughton and always operated with a modest roll. Even so, it remained steady until 1963 when only 10 pupils were left. That low number made the school unviable and children were transferred to larger nearby schools. After closure, the building became a private house, retaining much of its original form and remaining easy to recognise. Here we reach the other chapel mentioned earlier. It's the third to exist in Aslackby and the only one still standing. The first chapel stood near the brook on Sovereign Street. It was built in 1863 for the Wesleyan Methodists, and it was a modest brick building designed for a small congregation drawn from the village and nearby farms. It was rebuilt in 1882, likely to strengthen the structure and increase capacity. In early 1903 it was sold for £200 to Mr. Smith, who turned it into a baker's store. The building was later demolished, probably around 1981, and as we know, nothing survives on that site today. The chapel you see here was separate from those earlier buildings. It was purchased by the Methodists in 1903 and possibly used earlier by the Baptists. It remained active until 1985 and is now the village's sole surviving chapel. And now, of course, I've got the long walk back to the car, but that's easy enough. Now, to end this episode, we need to see the other place, which is within this parish's name. This isn't just Aslackby, it's Aslackby and Laughton. Now, Laughton is to the north of Aslackby, just off the A15, and it's actually two places, believe it or not, even though on the map it just looks like one. Laughton is a small hamlet about a mile north of Aslackby and forms the parish's northern section. Despite its size, its recorded past is unusually rich. The name comes from Old English, usually linked to Liachton, which means vegetable enclosure or garden farm, though some scholars prefer Lagerton, settlement by a stream. Both suit its position beside a small watercourse running east to west. Laughton was once two settlements, East Laughton and West Laughton. West Laughton later declined and is now recorded as a deserted medieval village. East Laughton is the lived-in part today. The DMV at West Laughton is a key archaeological site with earthworks including platforms, crofts, tofts, a pond and traces of earlier quarrying. Population records chart its decline. It had 17 families in the Elizabethan era, falling to 11 by 1825. Today, Laughton survives as a quiet cluster of houses and farms. It remained a separate parish until 1931, when it was merged with Aslackby, giving us the area that we've now explored in full. This one's amazing. What began with scattered early activity on the fen edge grew into a medieval landscape marked by moats, farmsteads and the unmistakable presence of the Knights Templar. Traces of those early lives remain visible in earthworks across Aslackby. The Templars' preceptory is definitely the most interesting thing here. Once complete with a round nave church and a south tower, it left a deep imprint on the village, even though the buildings were later absorbed into Temple Farm. St James's Church carries the architectural weight here now, aided by the Robin Hood and Little John of course. And how about that pretty little ford and the two small hamlets at Graby and Laughton? Yes indeed, this one has a depth that's far greater than its size.
We rode in under pale dawn light, steel at our side and vows held tight. Round nave rising on firm cut ground, stone on stone where our oath was bound. Fields stretched out by the old stream's bend, tracks we knew, mile after mile they'd win. Temple Farm stood where our hall once lay, walls long gone, but our mark stays. We kept watch where the fen winds roll, guarding land that shaped our soul. Dowsby calls and we answer still, right in the line by the chancel hill. Laughton waits with its earthworks hold, past we held and the tales they told. Through each storm, through each scar, we remain where our brothers are. We remain where our brothers are. Round nave shadow on the grass below, tower once tall with a southern glow. Grim sketched arches that time would claim, ruined traced lines that still bear our name. West Laughton's banks hold the shape of lives, crofts and toffs where the past survives. Stream runs on by the ford's worn track, steps we took now never come back. We kept watch where the fen winds roll, guarding land that shaped our soul. Dowsby calls and we answer still, right in the line by the chancel hill. Laughton waits with its earthworks sold, past we held and the tales they told. Through each storm, through each star, we remain where our brothers are. We remain where our brothers are. Steel may rust and towers may fall, but oath and purpose outlast them all. Temple ground beneath our stride, still the place where we reside. Dowsby calls and we answer still, right in the line by the chancel hill. Laughton waits with its earthworks old, past we held and the tales they told. Through each stone, through each scar, we remain where our brothers are. We remain where our brothers are. Dowsby calls and we ride again, round nave lost, but the truth remains. Laughton's fields hold our steps in clay, lines we carve that still guide the way. Through each stone, through each scar, we remain where our brothers are. Dowsby calls and the past stands near, temple ground that we hold so dear. Laughton's banks keep our watch alive, marks we left that still survive. Through each stone, through each scar, we remain where our brothers are. We remain where our brothers are.
Hello folks, welcome back to South Kesteven once again for another episode. Now I'm in a bus shelter to begin this episode because it's really windy today, and this is probably the best place to actually talk to you, but otherwise you wouldn't hear for the wind rushing past the camera. I can't do anything about wind noise. Now just outside this bus shelter there's an old pub, it's called the 3 Tons, and that will be our starting point for the parish of Kirkby Underwood. Kirkby Underwood, church village near Woodland. Today on TVI we come to Kirkby Underwood, and this is a nice little village. The name Kirkby Underwood comes from Old Norse. Kirke means church, as we know, and Underwood refers to its position near Woodland on the higher ground west of the fens. This settlement likely formed in the early medieval period during an era of Scandinavian influence in eastern England. Its name suggests a village organised around an early church site, probably established between the 9th and 11th centuries. Kirkby Underwood appears in the Domesday Book as part of the lands assessed in the Aveland area. Although the entry is brief, it records a small agricultural settlement with ploughland, meadow and woodland. After the Norman conquest, the manor passed through several families, and whatever village was here remained small and agricultural. Over the centuries, ownership changed hands through inheritance and sale, but the manor never grew into a large estate. The most important landmark here has always been the Church of St Mary and All Saints, a Grade 1 listed building. Parts of the church date from the 12th century, with later medieval additions. It's built in the Perpendicular style, with a chancel, a nave, a south aisle, and a tower containing 3 bells. The tower isn't the only tall thing here. To the west lies Callan's Lane Wood, which is managed by the Forestry Commission. Near the wood stand 2 tall radio masts and a BT microwave transmitter, which form modern landmarks on the skyline. Kirkby Underwood has had few widely known residents, but one notable historical figure is Richard Fox, born in nearby Rippingale and associated with the wider area. Fox was a leading bishop and a statesman under Henry VII and had family ties across the Aveland region. He was never tied directly to Kirkby Underwood though, even though he did have an influence on it. The same could be said for the most documented individual, James Renton, but his story is one of pure tragedy. He was a young RAF pilot who crashed near the village in 1951 and later died of his injuries. His death is recorded in local and RAF archives, and the event remains one of the few modern ones linked to national records here. He certainly came down in a lovely village, that's for sure, and had he survived the crash, there's no doubt he would have loved this place. As well as the church, we have a village hall to see and a former pub called the 3 Tuns. And that pub seems like a really good place to kick this one off. So this is the old 3 Tuns Inn, which has stood right here in Kirkby Underwood for well over 100 years, serving farm workers, travellers and local families. Its name comes from the 3 casks once used as brewing sign. 19th century maps and trade directories place it on the main route through the village, close to the former green. The earliest firm reference appears in Pigot's directory of 1828 and 29, which lists a beer house run by a local victualler. The building was, and still is, a modest stone house with outbuildings, a small yard and space for horses, though horses no longer stop here of course. By the 1841 census it was a recognised drinking place, with the landlord recorded as both a publican and a farmer. It sold beer from Bourne, Stamford and other market towns, and occasionally hosted small sales or gatherings linked to farm work. Trade was steady, and the inn remained a familiar fixture through the Victorian era. It later became part of the tied house system, likely under Solby, Sons and Winch of Stamford, with ales delivered by dray cart. The inn closed in the mid-1900s as rural trade declined, and the building was eventually converted into the private house you see here now. Right, just a couple of steps away from the old 3 Tuns is Kirkby Underwood's old school, which is here. Now this these days is the village hall, and it's got a parish notice board outside it, so we'll do that job next. This old water pump is a neat feature of Kirkby Underwood and a reminder of how practical village fixtures once were. It served as the main public water source before piped supplies arrived in the mid-1900s. The pump was likely installed in the late 1800s, replacing shallow wells that were prone to drought and contamination. Made of cast iron with a curved handle and a spout, it offered a safer and more reliable supply. Its design matches pumps produced by firms such as Lee & Co of London and Glenfield & Kennedy of Kilmarnock, both active across Lincolnshire. By the 1950s, most homes had indoor taps and the pump became a backup. Even so, it stayed in working order for some years before finally falling out of use. Some old almshouses once stood in this area, though nothing remains of them today. They were built in the early 1800s and they first appear on the 1841 map as a short row of cottages held under charitable tenure. They were simple single-storey stone buildings with small hearths, shared gardens and very basic furnishings, maintained through parish rates and occasional donations. They continued in use through the late 1800s and appear in Kelly's Directory of 1896. The 1911 census lists 2 elderly occupants living on small pensions. By the early 1900s, the cottages were considered outdated and discussions began about their future. They were eventually vacated and demolished in the mid-1900s, though the exact date is uncertain. Only the site is remembered today. Okay, so the footpath that leads you to the old almshouses site, you have to go up the side of the old pump that we saw a few minutes ago. And this isn't the greatest footpath you'll ever walk on, but it does do a job. In a moment it turns and it takes us towards the church, which here in Kirkby Underwood is really out on a limb. It's to the very far west of the village. It looks like you're going into the middle of nowhere when you head out towards it, but that's our next job. St Mary and All Saints Church is the oldest surviving building in Kirkby Underwood, with its dedication recorded in medieval documents. It stands on raised ground overlooking the village. Its earliest fabric includes the south doorway and parts of the nave wall, built in the late 1100s with the thick stonework and rounded forms linked to Norman design. During the 1200s and 1300s, the church was enlarged, gaining a south aisle and a chancel with tall lancet windows. The tower came later, built of local stone and fitted with 3 bells. One bell is medieval, while the others date from later repair work. In the 1500s, the church gained new fittings, including an octagonal font. Through the 1600s and 1700s, it received routine upkeep, with church wardens noting repairs to the roof, the glazing and the bell frame. The 1800s brought a Victorian restoration that renewed the roof, improved the chancel, strengthened older masonry and added new seating and flooring. After the Second World War, further work was carried out on the bells and the roof. Today, the church still holds regular services and remains a key landmark, valued for its long, unbroken use over more than 800 years. This is the Old Rectory, a substantial stone house typical of rural Lincolnshire in the 1800s. It has a garden, outbuildings and enough space to support a working clerical household. Before it was built, rectors serving Kirkby Underwood lived elsewhere. The house first appears on the 1841 map, marked with a yard and an adjoining bit of glebe land. It later housed a succession of clergymen, including Reverend William Henry Smythe in the 1860s and Reverend George Henry Wood in the 1880s. Sold in the mid-1900s, it's now a private home. Now, before coming here to Kirkby Underwood, I got a comment from a follower that said, look out for all the deer. Well, I haven't seen any deer on this walk around. probably all hiding from me. Here's something else that I have seen though. In the centre of the village you have a big business called Nelson M Green Limited. Now these guys are important to Kirkby Underwood because they are literally the biggest business it has. Now we may be mentioning these guys again when we get to another parish here in South Kesteven, and the reason for that is because, do you remember Folkingham? Well, one thing I didn't cover in the Folkingham episode was RAF Folkingham, and the reason for that is because the airfield ain't in Folkingham's boundaries. These guys own the land that RAF Folkingham sits on, and if we are to get onto that airfield, then I need to contact these to get permission. It's a Saturday morning at the moment, so I can't go in and ask today. I'm hoping they see this video though, and if they do, please, 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 Nelson M Green Limited, can I have access to the airfield? Thank you very much. That's a wrap, folks. Kirkby Underwood is a nice little village and all. I think the standout feature for me in this one is St Mary and All Saints Church. Well, it is after all the oldest and most important structure. Around the church, the village's supporting landmarks grew in practical response to local needs, even though some of them are now lost. Daily life was also shaped by practical structures, such as the old water pump. The 3 Tuns Inn and the village hall became the main indoor venues and gave Kirkby Underwood a pair of focal points, sustained by the people who lived and worked within its boundaries. It's not too different today, and above all, its surroundings are beautiful. On to the next, but before we do, we have to mention James Renton. At just 24 years old, Renton, an RAF pilot, died in 1951 after his aircraft crashed in the village on the 30th of May. He died in hospital the next day. He was from Rosemount in Bathgate, which is in Scotland. So to play us out, I thought it would be a nice touch in this episode to write a song from his perspective, moments before his plane reached the ground here. I've named this tune My Last Flight. See you tomorrow all.
I dropped through cloud on a cold gray day. Engines torn, no turning back. Stone walls waiting as the ground came fast. A village still beneath my track. St. Mary's Tower caught my fading sight. 3 bells steady in the air. Old roofs rising as my strength ran low. I felt the pull that kept me there, and I knew as the fields drew near, this place would hold my name. I fell, but I stayed. last flight late. Your stone and your soil kept me alive inside. Kirby, Underwood, your sky was my guide. Pump stood firm by the roadside verge, iron cold against the rain. The hall stood ready with its open door, a shelter built for loss and gain. The old inn watched as my wreckage burned, smoke drifting past its worn-out beams. The rectory garden lay still and calm, a quiet frame for broken dreams. And I knew as the fields drew near, this place would hold my name. I fell, but I stayed, held by the ground where my last flight laid. Your stone and your soil kept me alive inside. Kirby, Underwood, your sky was my guide. A path through the storm, but the earth here carried my final breath and kept my memory warm. Oh, 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 I fell, but I stayed, held by the ground where my last flight laid. Kirby, Underwood, your fields still remain, holding the trace of my last campaign. Kirby, Underwood, I'm part of your air, pilot at rest, still watching you there.
Welcome back to South Kesteven again, folks, and today I've got another really small village for you. Now, you remember Dowsby earlier this week? Well, this is another village that begins with D. It's actually the next village down the road from Dowsby towards Bourne. Its name is Dunsby. Dunsby, Duns Farmstead. Alright, today we come to a really small village that often gets overlooked simply because it's on the fringes of a much larger one. Its name is Dunsby, and it's the little brother of the much larger Rippingale, where we'll close out this latest run tomorrow. The name Dunsby comes from Old Norse and Old English elements. The first part, Dun, is thought to be a personal name. It began as a small agricultural settlement during the early medieval period, formed when Scandinavian settlers established farmsteads along the fen edge. Its position on slightly raised ground made it suitable for farming and livestock. The early church site, later replaced by the present building, indicates that a formal parish structure was in place by the 11th or 12th century. You've heard most of this before, right? Well, Dunsby appears in the Domesday Book under the name Dewsby. At that time, it was a small but established settlement with households, meadow, and some arable land all recorded. It all belonged to the fee of the Bishop of Lincoln and formed part of the Evelyn wapentake. Its manor passed through several hands. By the 19th century, records show that the governors of Charterhouse, London, held the patronage of the parish church, and speaking of that, it's easily the most important landmark to Dunsby's name. Grade 1 listed and dedicated to All Saints, it's built of ironstone and limestone. Its earliest parts date from the 12th century, including the south doorway and the chancel arch. Later additions from the decorated period include its north chapel and its tower. Another key feature here is a medieval village cross, a scheduled monument located at a road junction. Only the base and a short section of its shaft survive, but it's marked the historic heart of the settlement for years, and still does. There's not much more here, but there is an old school built in 1855. It closed in around 1950, but still survives today as the village hall. There's also a late 19th century milepost on a roadside near the village too. Dunsby has never been big enough to attract famous people of any sort, but it has produced individuals of local significance. The most notable modern person would be a man known only as P. Honnibal. His 2021 publication on Dunsby documents the lives of residents across several generations, and his research has become a key source for understanding the village as a whole. Let's see if I can add anything to it in this video. Okay, so here we are then in Dunsby village, and I'm beginning my walk here at Aveland Trees. Aveland Trees, growers and suppliers of native trees and shrubs for countryside planting, and they're based right at the edge of Dunsby, at the northern end, down this track here. If you look back this way, it's all open countryside, and if you look this way, there's Dunsby village. Let's have a walk. Let's get started with Dunsby Hall, which stands on the western side of Dunsby Drove and is a late Georgian house from around 1800. It's built in red brick with ashlar dressings. It has a 2-storey plan, double ridge slate roofs, and an early west to east range typical of rural gentry houses of its era. Its brickwork, sash windows, and restrained detailing matched the style found in Lincolnshire at the time. The house was altered in the late 1800s, gaining the bold, canted bays that dominate its south front. Those Victorian additions give the building a fresh look while keeping the earlier structure intact. Dunsby Hall was listed Grade 2 on the 22nd of January 1987. A matching stable block to the southwest also holds Grade 2 status, forming a strong historic group. The grounds contain a moated site that predates the present house. It hints at an earlier high-status dwelling, though little is firmly known about its form or date. All Saints Church is the oldest structure in Dunsby and a Grade 1 listed building noted for its rare early fabric. It's built of limestone and ironstone rubble with ashlar dressings, and its plan blends early English and decorated work together. The earliest parts date from the late 1100s, most clearly seen in the south doorway, which keeps its late Norman pattern despite 1800s restoration. The north aisle, added in around 1200, formed the first major enlargement. Its 4-bay arcade is highlighted in both the Lincolnshire Heritage Explorer and Pevsner's Buildings of England. Further work in the 1200s and early 1300s added the West Tower, a gabled porch, and decorated windows. The tower has stone-coped gables and cross finials, while the porch retains a 13th century doorway. Inside stands a 15th century octagonal font carved with Jesus Christ Maria Baptista. One panel carries Prior, interpreted as In Principo. The church also holds a rare peal of 8 Hannington chimes donated in 1891 and a Henry Bevington & Sons pipe organ from the late 1880s, restored and installed in 2017. All Saints now operates as a festival church. It no longer has weekly services, but remains active for key dates such as Harvest, Remembrance and Christmas, supported by a full parochial church council and local volunteers. The village hall began life as Dunsby School, built in 1855 on Main Road. White's 1856 directory records that the lords of the manor funded both the school and the attached schoolmaster's house. The building was planned as a compact rural school in red brick with ashlar dressings and a slate roof, opening with a single classroom that served the parish for almost 100 years. Inside it followed the usual Victorian pattern. There was a stove for heat, wooden benches, a small lobby and living quarters for the teacher in the linked schoolhouse. It mainly taught the children of farm workers. The school closed in December 1948 due to falling numbers and post-war reorganisation. After a short period of disuse, it was adopted as the village hall, while the schoolhouse became a private home. Its proportions, tall windows and attached house still hint at its earlier purpose. Today's ending song, by the way, is written from the perspective of a former pupil, and it's catchy. Stick around. Check this out, people. On the corner opposite the old school / village hall, there's a set of paving slabs in the floor. Now you might be thinking, why am I filming a set of paving slabs? Why are they important? Well, I'll show you why. Because there used to be something here, and this plaque tells you what used to be here. These paving slabs mark the site of Dunsby Village Cross, a medieval standing cross, a place of preaching, public proclamations and penance, the focal point of the village for many centuries. Dunsby might only be small, but it's one of the most characterful parishes in South Kesteven. It's a compact settlement along a single main route, and it has a cluster of structures that chart its progress from medieval origins to the present day. At its core is All Saints Church, and a short walk away stands Dunsby Hall, the most prominent domestic building it has. The village hall charts the rise and fall of small rural schools, but it remains active as the village hall whilst preserving its original form. Together, these three buildings form a tight architectural group that captures Dunsby's scale very well. They form a vivid record of a settlement that's grown, adapted and endured whilst keeping its historic core intact. One left this week, and it's a big one. See you there.
One, two, buckle my shoe. 3, 4, run past the door. 5, 6, chalk on the bricks. 7, 8, Dunsby's great. I ran past the porch of the old red school. Slate roof shining in the morning sun. Bell rope swinging as we lined up straight. Chalk dust swirling while the lessons begun. Tall windows glowing on the wooden floor. Teacher watching as we tried our best. Books held tight as the stove hum low. Dunsby felt like a place that knew its guests. Dunsby, Dunsby, I can still recall. Footsteps racing by the old school wall. Laughing in the yard with a skipping rhyme. Dunsby in my pocket for all of time. All Saints Tower stood firm nearby, stone worn smooth by the passing years. We traced each carving with curious hands, listening hard for the chime in our ears. The hall stood proud on the Joe's west side, brick and slate in a long bold line. We point at the base as we walk back home, pretending the place held a secret sign. Dunsby, Dunsby, I can still recall. Footsteps racing by the old school wall. Laughing in the yard with a skipping rhyme. Dunsby in my pocket for all of time. Winter mornings meant a frosted path, breath like smoke as we stamped our feet. Summer brought the hum of the fields, warm air drifting down the village street. We grew up fast in that little room, slate boards shining in the afternoon light. Every day felt bright and new. Dunsby held us steady and tight. Dunsby, Dunsby, I can still recall. Footsteps racing by the old school wall. Laughing in the yard with a skipping rhyme. Dunsby in my pocket for all of time. 1, 2, buckle my shoe. 3, 4, run past the door. 5, 6, chalk on the bricks. 7, 8, Dunsby's great. 9, 10, sing it again!
Hello folks, welcome back to South Kesteven for the last time this week. Parish number 59 out of 83. We are certainly getting through these South Kesteven ones, aren't we? It'll be finished by the end of the year. Now, you definitely need to stick around till the end of this episode in this one, because I've got something rather special to show you towards the end. You will definitely want to see it if you are a railway enthusiast. But we've got a nice little village to walk around first. This is Rippingale. Rippingale, Rippers people. Rounding off this latest run in South Kesteven, we're in the parish of Rippingale, and this one's got a few tricks up its sleeve. On the outside, this looks like any normal English village, but there are a few bits that almost hide in plain sight out here. Let's start with the name. Rippingale is usually traced to Old English. Most place name scholars link it to Rippers people or the settlement of Rippers followers, with the second element, hal, meaning a nook or a small piece of land. Early spellings include Reppinghale and Rippinghale. Rippingale developed as an early Anglo-Saxon settlement on slightly raised ground north of the Fens. By the 10th and 11th centuries, Rippingale had a defined territory, open fields, and a church site, indicating an established parish structure before the Norman conquest. At the time of Doomsday, Rippingale was a substantial settlement for its region. The survey lists Sokeland attached to the royal manor of Folkingham, meaning that Rippingale's land was tied to a larger administrative estate. Later, Rippingale's lands were held under the honour of Folkingham. Through the medieval period, the manor passed through several noble families, including the de Gant and the de Beaumont lines, and then it became linked with the Duchy of Lancaster. Enclosure took place gradually, with piecemeal changes in the 17th and 18th centuries. By the 19th century, the manor had lost most of its earlier admin role, though estate ownership still shaped most of what we see here now. The most prominent landmark is St Andrew's Church, yet another one with that same dedication, which seems to be all over this area. Other landmarks include the village green, the old vicarage, and several 19th century farmhouses. Rippingale has produced individuals of local significance. One of the most notable is George Hussey Pack, who, as we know, was a railway director who went on to live at Caythorpe Hall, and speaking of the railway, there's something here you have to see. The former Rippingale railway station, which opened in 1872 on the Bourne and Sleaford line, closed to passengers in 1930 and to goods in 1964. You can find the old station away to the east of the village. Now, if it was just an old station, we'd cover it in the usual way and leave it be afterwards, but this one has something incredible to see at it. I won't give too much away because it'll spoil what's coming up. Keep watching to find out what I'm talking about. The old school on Main Road began in the early Victorian period, first noted in parish records in the 1840s. Built in brick with a gabled front and tall windows, it followed the standard layout of its time. Around 40 to 50 pupils were taught in the single room it has. Today the building is used by Wherry & Sons, one of the oldest UK agricultural firms. They supply organic pulses and grains, including sesame, coriander and millet. St Andrew's Church stands on a raised patch of firm ground, first developed in the late 1100s with a simple nave and a chancel built in local limestone. That early structure was plain and Romanesque. During the 1200s the building grew, gaining tall pointed arches in the nave arcade and a new south aisle. Further enlargement followed in the 1300s when the west tower was added. Its strong buttresses, tall belfry openings and battlemented top give it a striking outline, once noted by Pevsner as one of the finest towers in this part of South Kesteven. Records mention a small ring of bells, later listed as 3 in regular use. The 1700s and early 1800s brought steady maintenance rather than major alteration. The 20th century required more focused work, particularly on the tower parapet and stonework. Inside, the medieval font survives with its octagonal bowl, and several windows keep fragments of old glass. The restored nave roof follows its traditional form. Outside, the tower dominates the village skyline and remains the building's defining feature. Rippingale has just the one pub, the Bull Inn, built in the early 1800s. It began as a beer house serving farm labourers from the village and workers travelling around Bourne and the Fen Edge. The building has a simple frontage, sash windows and a central doorway. Inside there was once a tap room, a small parlour and basic lodging, with stables and cart storage behind. Newspaper reports mention livestock sales once occurring in its yard. There were inquests in its tap room and there was the odd bout of disorder. One of those things may still occur today. I'll leave it up to you to guess which one. The inn passed through several long-serving landlords, including the Harrison, Johnson and Tebb families. An 1894 notice records the sale of farm equipment here, showing its role in local trade. With the arrival of motor vehicles, the yard was adapted for cars. The inn survived wartime rationing and later gained a reputation for food as well as its drink. The War Memorial now. This stands beside St Andrew's Church and was erected after the First World War to honour the men from Rippingale who died in that conflict. Built of limestone, it has a tall tapering shaft on a square plinth, all set on a stepped base. The cross rises to about 3 metres. 11 men are listed, arranged alphabetically, with ranks and regiments where known. In the 1940s, 2 names from the Second World War were added, carved by a Bourne stonemason in a matching style. Okay people, I've got a parish notice board here in front of the church, so you know what that means. Time for a card. Up there I think, it's the best place for it. There we go. It's one of these, it's got a door on it, so bear with. There we go. Now, our next job from here is to go up Middle Street, because up there, there's an old shop. Looking left up the street, we reach the old Rippingale stores. The village has no shop today, but this house served that role for well over 100 years. It appears on Ordnance Survey maps of the 1880s as post office and stores, confirming its dual function. The layout followed the usual Victorian pattern, a front sales room with a large display window and a rear storeroom and living space above. Late 1800s records note deliveries to outlying farms by handcart or pony, and the shopkeeper acted as a newsagent, receiving newspapers from Bourne each morning. During the First World War, the post office roll grew, with telegrams and letters handled daily. Parish minutes from 1916 record upgraded postal equipment. As motor transport improved, the shop began stocking fresh produce brought in from Bourne and Sleaford, but increased access to larger retailers later created problems. By the late 20th century, supermarkets placed pressure on small rural shops just like this. Rippingale stores adapted with longer hours, takeaway snacks, and an expanded range of newspapers and magazines, yet it eventually closed and became a private home. Its original shopfront proportions, though, remain easy to spot. The playing field now. This began as farmland, used much like the fields around it. Parish minutes from the 1920s give the first firm reference to a dedicated space for sport here. Before then, games and gatherings took place on borrowed ground, but by the 1930s the playing field was established and in regular use. Football matches, children's games and outdoor meetings all took place here. The field stayed active through the 1940s despite wartime limits, and the 1950s brought organised fixtures and sports days. This leads neatly to the village feast, long linked with the playing field. Earlier feasts were held on the green or in farmyards, but this site soon became the preferred setting. The Rippingale feast featured tug-of-war contest, children's races and visiting attractions, and it became a key date in the village calendar. Proceeds often supported field improvements. As far as I know, it still takes place today. We're right off the playing field. We're on Pinfold Close now. We've got a residential area to walk through for the next sort of 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll be heading towards the actual Pinfold and a few other bits and bobs on the lane that runs to the top of the village. It's called Station Street, I think, which makes a bit of sense because if you keep following it you do get to the old station eventually. Willows Care Home stands on the eastern side of Rippingale. Parish records from the mid-1900s note a detached post-war house on this site, known locally as the Willows. Built in brick with a tiled roof, it has a simple two-storey plan, a large garden and outbuildings. The name came from willow trees along the boundary, some of which are still in place today. By the late 1970s, the house had been enlarged with rear extensions and internal alterations. Its increased size made conversion practical, and it's operated as a care home for around 25 years. Rippingale once supported two nonconformist chapels, a Wesleyan Methodist chapel and a Primitive Methodist chapel. Both were active from the 1800s into the mid-1900s. The Wesleyan chapel began as a small meeting room used by travelling preachers from the Bourne circuit. Built in brick, it had a simple rectangular plan, tall arched windows and a gabled front. The Primitive Chapel, built in 1860 on Station Street, was smaller but followed the usual Primitive Methodist style, with plain brickwork, a modest doorway and simple fittings. By the 1960s, both chapels had closed. They appear clearly on the old maps at the start of this video. One of them stood in this area, which is why I'm talking about them now. I'll point out the other one shortly. Rippingale's pinfold is a well-preserved survivor of an old agricultural practice and is now Grade 2 listed. Built of limestone rubble with a simple rectangular plan, it has thick, roughly dressed walls. The entrance faces the road and once had a wooden gate, replaced several times. Inside, the space is unroofed and the ground sloped slightly for drainage. As livestock control improved, the pinfold fell out of use, but the structure stays intact today. Small repairs were later carried out to stabilise its walls and keep it in good condition. And that, of course, is why Pinfold Close is so named, and here's the other end of Pinfold Close right here, you see, right next to the Pinfold off Station Street. Let's continue down Station Street towards the village hall. That's next. As promised, here's the site of the other former chapel. We'll skip past this because there's not a lot more to add to it, and we'll make our way next towards the village hall. The village hall began to take shape in the years after the Second World War. Parish minutes from the late 1940s record efforts to secure a site and raised funds for a purpose-built hall, leading to the plot beside the playing field. Fundraising in the early 1950s moved quickly, and construction soon followed. Local builders completed the hall in the late 1950s. The original structure was a simple brick rectangle with a pitched roof containing a main hall, a small kitchen and basic storage. It soon became a busy venue hosting concerts, craft fairs, clubs and groups. The village feast was even held indoors here when weather intervened. Gradual improvements followed, including new heaters and floor repairs. Over the last 2 decades, the hall has gained new lighting, better insulation and an updated kitchen, bringing it fully in line with safety standards. Modest in scale, it remains one of Rippingale's most used buildings. Right, so from the village hall, there's a public footpath around the back of it that leads back to the playing fields, which I'm about to use to get back to the other street. That'll take us back down to Wendover Close, which is where I've parked the car. And when we've got to the car, I'm then going to take you out towards the old station here in Rippingale. And like I said at the beginning of this video, if you are a railway enthusiast, you might want to watch this next section. Rippingale may seem like a standard Lincolnshire village, but just to the east lies the route of the old Bourne to Sleaford railway line, once home to Rippingale Station. Built by the Great Northern Railway and opened in 1872, it served the village and nearby settlements, linking them to Bourne, Sleaford and the rail network beyond. The station followed the usual Great Northern style: red brick, a pitched slate roof and tall chimneys. It included a waiting room, a booking office and parcels area, with a small goods yard to the north containing a siding, a loading dock and coal pens. Traffic included agricultural produce, livestock, coal and mailbags collected by early trains. Excursion trains ran too, including seaside trips to Skegness. Passenger use declined as road transport improved and services ended in 1930. Goods traffic continued until closure in 1964, after which the track was lifted. However, part of the track bed survives, and for good reason. The former yard holds a preserved industrial locomotive. This small shunting engine was brought here after closure and placed on a short length of track for display. Railway enthusiasts often visit this, and photographs of it appear in heritage newsletters. The engine is typical of those used in factories and sidings across Britain. It never worked on this line, but it provides a striking visual link to the station's past. Repainted several times and kept in good condition, it remains visible from the road and instantly recognisable to anyone who ventures out to the old station site, though not many people pass by given how remote this location actually is. To the west of the village once stood Rippingale's windmill, a brick tower mill typical of those built across South Kesteven in the late 1700s and early 1800s. It worked as a corn mill, grinding wheat, barley and oats for local farms, and remained active for decades. Decline set in during the late 1800s. The sails were removed, the cap failed, and the tower became a hollow shell before being taken down for safety. By the 1960s, only the lower section survived, and that too has since disappeared. The site later gained two features that kept the mill's name alive: Windmill Motors and the Windmill Inn. Windmill Motors began trading in the late 20th century on land close to the former mill, specialising in vehicle sales and repairs from the 1980s onwards. The Windmill Inn stood almost next door and appears in records from the 1800s. It remained active into the early 1900s before closing. For a time it stood empty, and today little remains. Most of the building has been demolished. Older images on Google Street View give the best sense of how it once looked. It's hard to drive away from Rippingale without smiling a bit. This one's full of things that I just love. At its core stands St Andrew's Church. That, the cross on the green and the pinfold are brilliant examples of how rural life once was. Rippingale's social and practical life is recorded in its smaller buildings too, like the old Rippingale stores, once the village's main supplier of goods and postal services. The Bull Inn as well, still going strong, is a particular highlight. Moving outward, the parish's working history becomes clearer. The old windmill left its name stamped on later enterprises such as Windmill Motors and the former Windmill Inn. But it's the old railway station which steals the show here. It's not every day you see an old steam shunter.
I walk the old line where the sleepers once lay, past the brickwork standing firm in the light of day. A platform edge, a signal post, a trace of steam, and then I see it waiting like a long lost dream.
Paint worn thin, but the spirit's still strong. Metal built for work, built to last this long.
Rippingale, I hear the rail again, steel and memory running through the brain. Rippingale, the past is breathing still, right beside the station on the edge of the hill.
The yard lies open where the wagons once stood. Cold dust settled deep in the old brick wood, and there it rests, that engine proud and bold,
A shunter built for labor in the days of old. Sun on steel, and the silence breaks
as I trace each rivet for the path it takes.
Rippingale, I hear the rail again, steel and memory running through the grain. Rippingale, the past is breathing still, right beside the station on the edge of the hill. I feel the weight of time in the iron frame,
Hear distant wheels calling out its name.
tracks long gone, but the spirit stays,
Holding tight to all those working days.
Rippingale, I hear the rail again, steel and memory running through the grain. Rippingale, the past is breathing still, right beside the station on the edge of the hill. Rippingale,
Rippingale,
where the old line sleeps,
the old line sleeps,
but the engine guards the ground it keeps. Rippingale,
Rippingale, standing breathing in
a village marked by ironstone and tin.
Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.